When we talk about sustainability in the space industry, we're usually talking about space sustainability issues like traffic management and debris. Amber Ledgerwood is trying to bring attention to sustainability issues here on Earth. Amber is the Senior Manager of Social and Environmental Impact at SES, and she leads the operator's ESG strategy. In this episode, Amber talks about how environmental, social, and governance issues apply to SES and the satellite industry. These issues range from the climate impact of space companies on Earth, diversity and inclusion, how a company's products impact society, and also responsible behavior in space. Amber hopes her role influences the industry beyond SES and challenges other space companies to take concrete actions to minimize climate impact and improve diversity among their workforce. It's a critical topic and one that also gets at bigger questions of corporate responsibility and how businesses define what success is. I'm Rachel Jewett, and you're listening to On Orbit, the podcast that asks, what's our future in space? Hi, Amber. Thank you so much for joining the podcast. How are you doing today?
Oh my gosh, it's my pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm doing really well.
Awesome. Well, also thank you for being on VIA's advisory board. That's kind of how I got the idea to have you on the podcast. For our listeners, we had our first, we have an updated advisory board, and we had our first meeting last week, and you were talking a little bit about your role focusing on ESG, and you had some interesting comments that I wanted to hear more about. So I'm excited to kind of dig in a little deeper with you.
I'm excited as well. And the advisory board has been a great experience so far. It's awesome to hear from other people around the industry about the things they're working on. And I'm happy that I can tee up this conversation for us.
Yeah, I always think it's cool to have people with lots of different disciplines and companies in the same area, just like picking everyone's brain on the issues they're focused on. I always come away with like story ideas, and I think it's really neat.
Absolutely. It's easy to work in a silo, so when you hear from outside perspectives, that's great.
Yeah. Okay, so your role is the head of social and environmental impact at SES. So when I think of like impact of satellite companies, typically I feel like if we're talking about like environmental stuff, we're thinking about space sustainability. And I know that's part of it, but I know you have a much bigger focus than that. So tell us about what your role entails and kind of how this came about.
Yeah, absolutely. So at SES a few years ago, our CEO had a real drive to make sure that we were making a difference as a company and that we were purpose-led. And he has a great purpose statement that was, we do the extraordinary in space to deliver amazing experiences everywhere on Earth. And one thing that we really wanted to do at SES was define what those amazing experiences meant for the world and how it aligned with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So my role at SES is to make sure that in the way that we are operating as a company and in the delivery of our products and services, that we're positively impacting society, that we're minimizing our negative impact on the environment, and that we're overall operating responsibly. So it's basically an ESG function. It's an environmental, social, and governance function within SES.
Awesome. And how long have you been in it?
So SES formally launched our strategy, our Horizon strategy, which is, I can talk more about later, but we formally launched that about 2 years ago. So we are in the thick of implementing the strategy and really making sure it aligns with how we operate every day.
Right. Interesting. So you mentioned the UN Sustainable Goals. So did this kind of come out of SES wanting to fulfill and work toward the UN Sustainable Goals?
Yeah, I think, for my personal drive, it was about understanding and making sure that SES was operating responsibly as a part of society. So the way that businesses should be viewed are, in my view, we are a member of society and we should be delivering value to society. So the UN Sustainable Development Goals basically outline what society needs to work on, the problems that we have across the world, And businesses play a huge role in that, right? So it is businesses' responsibility to make sure that we're addressing some of the challenges of the world and also not causing harm in what we do.
Yeah. So environmental, social, and governance. Can you talk more about like what that actually means and like what the goal of ESG strategy is?
Yeah, so ESG is a term that I think kind of derived from CSR. And many people who have been in business for many years would know the term CSR as corporate social responsibility. And this was basically companies trying to give back to the world. They set up philanthropies. They made sure that they were working with NGOs and giving back in some meaningful way, sometimes monetarily, to the communities where they operate. And ESG challenges that paradigm and really shifts it into the operations of a company. So how do you operate as a company in everything you do and incorporate environmental, social, and governance factors? So within environment, we look at obviously your climate impacts, your impact on the environment, but also the impacts of the environment on you as a business. So the climate risks that you have as a business in where you operate and how you operate. In social, you look at things like your effect on the workforce, how your products and services are influencing society or how they are positively contributing to societal good, and also human rights type issues in the supply chain, across the value chain, things like that. With governance, the G, we really look at the processes, procedures, policies that a company has in place, how they're structured, what the accountability across the organization is. And so it's really more around due diligence of yourself as a company and also the partners that you work with.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Is SES ahead of the game in having in the satellite industry? Is SES ahead of the game in having you focused on this? Like, are there similar? I'm not familiar with like kind of similar roles at other companies.
I like to believe that SES is ahead of the game, right? We have worked really hard to challenge ourselves as a company and also lead the way for the industry. That was one of the goals of starting this, was to have that ripple effect. So when you think about ESG, it's really important to understand that it's not just your own company's operations, it's how you operate in the world along with your supply chain, your customers, the entire value chain. So when we start something, it should have a ripple effect across the entire ecosystem. So for us, we really wanted to lead the way in the satellite industry. I think in general, we've seen other companies start this process as well, which is really encouraging. There are some companies who are probably a little bit ahead of us, and there are some companies who are just getting started. And I think that's positive. I think everyone is probably starting on this ESG journey as of right now. Now, whether there are similar roles or not, I have met a few people who have taken on the ESG issues within their company. And so I think there are some companies that have designated it to other parts of their organization, and they don't have a solid ESG person in charge. And I think that's okay. In an ideal world, if a company is operating totally responsibly, it's not necessary to have an ESG function. For SES, we felt like we really wanted to move fast and we really wanted to make an impact. And so having a dedicated function felt really important.
Yeah. So when you took this on, how did you get started and be like, how are we going to approach this issue? And like, what do we want to measure and what resources can we dedicate to it? Like, what was that process like?
Yeah, that's a great question. We started, like I said, from our purpose statement, right? How can we better define those extraordinary or amazing experiences in the context of what we do and how it aligns with the UN Sustainable Development Goals? We knew that was kind of a starting point for us. And then what we wanted to do from there was understand our stakeholders. So another key element of ESG is making sure that you aren't just taking a company-only approach, a siloed approach, but that you understand the people that you affect as a business. So we talked with stakeholders across our supply chain. We talked with civil society. We talked with peer organizations. We talked with space sustainability experts. We talked with a bunch of different stakeholder communities so we could understand the issues that they thought we could positively impact, and so that we could better align those to the things that our internal stakeholders thought that we could positively impact. From that, we came up with our Horizon strategy, which is 4 pillars of focus that SES is taking on. The first is space sustainability.
Mm-hmm.
The second is climate action. The third is diversity and inclusion. And the fourth is critical human needs. And critical human needs is really, what are our products and services doing out on the planet to help people meet their critical human needs, like education, health services, et cetera. Each of those pillars has kind of targets that we are working towards. They have, action plans and goals and things that we are trying to build within the company and build the capacity within the company to better approach those targets. So we're on a journey. We started with a strategy, and I think the implementation of that strategy and the operationalizing of ESG is the current work at hand.
Mm-hmm. During the advisory board call, you made a comment about the space industry being behind other industries when it comes to ESG. Do you mean like in a climate sense or overall looking at ESG? Or what did you mean by that?
Yeah, no, that's good. So I think it's important to understand that my viewpoint is very much that ESG is not just a reporting function.
Yeah.
It is not just a check of the box where I sit. And that's why I really wanted my title to be social and environmental impact, because it really is about the impact of the organization. So it's much more holistic than just making sure that we are reporting the right metrics.
Mm-hmm.
To me, it feels really important that ESG values, or the ways in which you make an impact, are built into your company purpose. It's built into your company values. It's something that is truly a part of your business strategy. So the metrics and the things that you define are important to you in ESG are also important to you being successful as a business. And so when I say that companies are behind, I look at companies outside of our industry that have really built this into their ethos as a company. They have built it into the fabric of how they operate. And so I think that we are just getting started. Even SES, I think we have, targets, and we have defined a strategy, which is beyond what some companies in our industry have done. But we still have a long way and a lot that we want to accomplish. I think that we are ambitious in what we want to achieve, and kind of getting to that place where we are a company where it's fully embedded into everything we do is the goal.
Yeah. What are some of the companies that you look up to that you think are doing a good job?
Yeah, I think, the first that comes to mind is Patagonia, right?
Okay.
It's way outside of our industry, outside of our industry. But everything they do is built on this belief of environmental stewardship, right? And you can see that in their business model, the way that they encourage reuse of their products, the way that they encourage reselling of their products, the types of products that they put out. So it just is so built into, and if you know about the company as a whole, the way they treat their workers, the way they think about childcare, the way they think about the communities where they operate, and the offering of their space to their communities, it's really inspiring. They do an absolutely amazing job of being a member of society in a real way. I think there are other companies that are a little closer to us in the technology space. I think Microsoft actually does a really nice job setting ambitious targets, trying to understand and do what they can do. I follow somebody on LinkedIn, the CEO of Colt Technology Services, and they're a telecommunications company in the UK, and they do a really amazing job, offering inspiring environmental stances for their company, and also in the ways that they operate. I think they really, truly build it into how they operate as a company.
Those are really good examples. I like the Patagonia example because it doesn't, it has nothing to do with satellite, but that doesn't mean that satellite can't, take principles and outlook from there.
100%. Absolutely. I think, we could be looking at them as an example of how before they did that, I don't know that that was happening in the fashion industry or in the outerwear industry at all. And so I think it's an opportunity for innovation if you can really build it into the ethos of your company. I think another example that I didn't say, which is always, they have really led the way as well, is Unilever. So they, are another consumer products company, but the way that they think about their supply chain, the way that they think about their overall business strategy is really steeped in ESG principles and purpose, and making sure that they are being responsible in the way that they're acting and aligned with the sustainable development goals.
Okay, very cool. So one of the components of that you mentioned was climate. So kind of, how do you look at the climate impact of a space company on Earth? I mean, obviously SES has offices, it has a supply chain, and but when we think of SES, we're thinking of stuff up in space versus a climate impact here on Earth. So how do you look at that?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, and something that we as an industry need to focus on a lot more. So as you had mentioned earlier in the call, we like to think of space sustainability as being a huge ESG issue within our industry. And it is, right? It is very unique to our industry as well. So it's something that we can talk about later. But I think climate action is something that we can't use the excuse that we operate in space, and so we don't need to worry about our climate impact on Earth. It is something every company needs to be responsible for. Companies have a much bigger footprint and a much bigger scope and impact than an individual. And so if every company was able to cut their emissions, then we would be in a better place from a climate story. And it's so much bigger than just climate. Understanding your overall environmental impact, the biodiversity effects that you have, what kind of materials you're sourcing from this planet in order to produce your products and services. All of those things are things that I think we as an industry need to take a better look at. And at SES, what we first did was look at our GHG emissions, because that was something where we really needed to make sure we had an overall scope of what are the big pockets of areas where we need to work to reduce our emissions. And we expanded our scope 3 emissions. So in GHG emission language, there's different types of emissions depending on where they come from. And your scope 3 emissions are your upstream and downstream activities. So that's in your supply chain and in your value chain, in your customer.
Okay.
Set.
Yeah.
And we really expanded the scope of our scope 3 emissions so that we could be inclusive of all of the upstream and downstream activities. And we found, some hotspot areas. Satellite manufacturing and launching is a big piece of the space industry's environmental impact.
Yeah.
And so what we did from there and what we're embarking on now is our life cycle assessments. And this is a really important thing that we think SES can lead on, and that we encourage everyone to get involved in understanding their overall environmental impact. So we've started with life cycle assessments, which will help us understand where those hotspot areas are in the satellite manufacturing and the delivery of our products and services. And it will help us identify those hotspots, and then hopefully lead to eventually kind of an eco design or an innovation story where we can drive further and better production of our products and services.
Okay. So this could be like greener improvements in manufacturing and launch.
Absolutely. What are we using material? Could we source different materials?
Mm-hmm.
Could we use different materials? Could we cut back on different operational procedures that we do in order to reduce our emissions and our overall environmental impact? Are there greener ways to deliver the services, right? Is that something that customers might value? Those are all things that we're kind of asking right now.
Yeah. What could that mean of greener ways to deliver satellite services?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a bunch of initiatives right now across the industry that are interesting, from greener teleports, right? Are there ways that you can use renewable energy in teleports, or are there ways that you can create some efficiencies in teleport usage. So the ground infrastructure is a big piece, I think, of our overall footprint. The other thing that I would love to see and that I think we can build on as an industry is the circular use of our products and services. Is there a way that we can keep things from going to landfill and drive a more circular mindset when it comes to the reuse of satellites, right? The reuse of ground technology, the reuse of user terminal equipment, all of those things. We have really smart people in this industry, and I know that's something that we just haven't given enough brain power to, because it's something that I think we could definitely do more on.
Yeah, definitely. And you've talked about wanting to have a bigger impact in the industry. And then in order to work with your whole supply chain on that would, you guys launch with SpaceX. So that would be, it could have like wider reaching changes. And the same thing with, working with all the different manufacturers.
Yeah, I think I mentioned earlier in the call, but ESG is a ripple effect. It most certainly is. And I think our customers have also challenged us on certain issues because they were asking us as part of their supply chain. And so I think we can do the same in our supply chain, and it will definitely ripple effect to have a much larger cascading effect. And that's exactly what you want to have happen when we need to make, urgent climate action is needed. And so that's exactly what you want to see happen.
Yeah. Any other either big picture or specific thoughts on what you think the space industry could do better on its climate impact?
I mean, I think in general, like I said, I think some of us are further along in the journey. Others are just starting, and others can teach, right? Because they've kind of mastered it. I think in the space industry, we're probably more in the early pieces of the journey. And so I would just encourage people to expand your scope 3 emissions for GHG emissions as a start. I would encourage people to think about doing life cycle assessments so that they can really understand, and the whole industry can understand better. And then, one of the kind of challenges we have is visibility into that supply chain. Like where are we? How far? We can only go so far into our supply chain, and so really having some transparency as an industry and working together as an ecosystem to understand the full supply chain and the full value chain, I think it's something that would be interesting to work together on.
Yeah, that's an interesting challenge that you mentioned about visibility into the supply chain.
Yeah, and I don't think we're alone on that, right? I think that that's something that a lot of people are struggling with, and it's just becoming more and more important. But I think that is something where we could focus together.
Yeah. So space sustainability was another area that you mentioned, which is, kind of what we typically think about when we think about space companies looking at sustainability. So how does this fit in? Because I'm sure that I don't think, actually, I don't know if I say this, but I don't know that space sustainability is like in the UN sustainable goals, but I do know the UN like does look at space sustainability. This is a super rambling question, but how does that fit in?
I can totally appreciate it. So at SES, it's a core pillar of ours. And I think that for any space company, we absolutely have to be taking space sustainability seriously. Because it's a unique ESG issue for our industry, right? And only we are going to be able to tackle it. It is something, I think, with the incredible growth that we're seeing in the space industry, we need to make sure that we are putting the right processes, policies, procedures, coordination in place so that we don't have an issue in generations to come where we have an unusable resource of space, right? Because we haven't taken care of it. So I think there's a lot of conversations happening right now. If any listeners are not a part of those conversations and you are in the space industry, you should be, speaking up and making sure that you are understanding what's going on. But I think there's a lot of different people having conversations about what kinds of policies should be in place, who should be involved. how do we protect fair access to space, which I think is a really important question. And, from an SES perspective, we're just trying to be involved in as many conversations as we can at this point. And obviously we try and operate responsibly in space in how we operate, right? Making sure that we are being transparent and that we are doing everything that we need to be doing to make sure that everyone can operate safely there. So I think it's an emerging topic. I think it's something where a lot of work is being done, and I'm starting to see some action, right? Some real actionable things happening. So it is exciting to watch.
Yeah, I feel like it's become a much more mainstream conversation just in the time that I've been in the industry. And, as we're talking today, it was just last week that the FCC fined Dish, and that was like the first enforcement fine for space debris, which is really interesting.
Yeah, I'm nodding my head furiously for people that can't see, right? I mean, I think
but on what you were saying, that there's all these different conversations happening, there's all these different industry groups and different regulatory bodies, and it's a very challenging issue because it's not like there's one entity that is responsible for it.
Yeah, I think that is a challenge. I mean, we are trying to be involved in as many conversations as we can be. And I hope we're not missing any conversations that are happening out there, right? And so when you don't have that centralized point, I think that's the risk that could happen. But at the same time, it is good to have diverse perspectives, diverse, contributions. And I think that there will be a lot more to come on this issue in the months to come.
Yeah. Okay. So diversity and inclusion, that's one that I definitely wanted to talk about. What did you find when you looked at SES, how SES is doing in this regard?
Yeah, so when we did our stakeholder outreach initially to develop our ESG strategy, diversity and inclusion came out as a really high material issue. It was something that I don't think anyone listening would be surprised that, especially when it comes to gender, there's not a lot of representation across diverse, we're mostly a male dominated industry. So that was something we really wanted to tackle at SES. And we have a wonderful partner internally in our people and culture team who handles this for our workforce. And what we've done is set really, ambitious targets around gender representation for women in leadership. That was something we really wanted to focus on. And one of the key things that we did in order to drive that is to make sure that our senior leadership is held accountable to those targets as well. So that is something that I think building it into your governance and your structure and your accountability as an ESG program is making sure that you can set targets and that people are accountable for them. And so that is something that we've been working on. We've also made some, changes in policies and procedures to better accommodate women at all different points in their career, and mentorship programs. And also, it extends beyond our workforce. So how are we encouraging the funnel of potential women and diverse candidates into the space industry through STEM education initiatives and partnerships with universities that offer, diverse candidates. And so that has become really important as well as just getting our name out there in some of these places and making sure that that those, diverse voices can be heard in our industry.
Yeah, that's all extremely important. You just have to go to a space conference and look around and see space has a diversity problem.
Yeah,
I feel like it's getting better, but
yeah, as I was reflecting on this question, we definitely feel the urgency to do more. That is understood. And I remember starting in the industry, over 15 years ago, and we've made a lot of progress. Let's just say that. I think there has been a lot of progress that has been made. And it's, also in part to media, publications like yours who are raising the voices of women in the industry and making sure that people are recognized and heard and diverse perspectives are brought in. So
yeah, great. Thank you. I like that you mentioned company policy, because it's one thing to, encourage women and try to hire more women, but to actually have policies in place to make it easier for women to stay in the workforce is super important also. Can you share examples of any of those?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I think was early on in our D&I program was a change to our maternity leave policy, right?
Yeah.
Making it we were definitely already pretty generous with the maternity leave in different locations, depending on where we were located, but we made it kind of a universal policy so that everyone knew what the policy was. We also extended parental leave to our male colleagues so that they could take off, which provides a little bit of equity in the expectation that women wouldn't always be the ones who are off on maternity leave. So that's just one example, but I think it's a good one to show like those are the little things and policies that you can make within your company that that make a difference. Another example is coming to mind around, unconscious bias training and making sure that in the language that we use around different applications and job postings that we're making sure that we're just being gender inclusive and making sure that, we're not predetermining that a male should apply for this instead of a female.
Oh yeah, absolutely. What was the last point that was it critical? It was like
critical human needs.
Critical human needs. Okay, what does that mean?
Yeah, so we're really trying to make sure that we put metrics around the impact that our products and services are making in the world. So it is one thing to measure your financial impact. We are a business. We want to make sure that we are definitely doing that. Making money is a priority. And I thought it was really important to understand how our products and services are being used in the world to better align with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and also to make sure that we're helping people meet their critical human needs. That is the value that we're bringing to society. We do that through telecommunications products. We do that through the video content that we provide. And so it just feels like that is something that we should be measuring and making sure that we obviously have a huge focus on that in our business strategy as well. So
yeah, I mean, do you feel like that's an area where a satellite is like, oh, we really shine here, that our job is to connect people, and that
yeah,
right
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think, if I want to be a little controversial, I would say if you aren't helping people in society, then is your company adding value, right, to society? So you need to find those ways that you are connecting your products and services to the value that you create on this planet and in the world. So to me, that feels really important. And it absolutely is a place where a satellite shines. I mean, I was brought into the industry to work specifically on disaster response. And I was so proud of the work that the satellite industry in particular can do there, right? When people need connectivity the most, we are able as an industry to connect people to the information that they need. So it's really important. I think we provide as an industry critical services, and not just the telecommunications part of the industry, but if you look at Earth observation satellites and all the other things that are happening in the industry that are new, I mean, these are critical. These are critical components of life on Earth, and so helping to define what that impact is really important.
Yeah. I almost feel like we hear about it more on the Earth observation side than the telecommunications side. But
yeah, I think that's true. And I think, just to kind of catch up on that, not only for the critical human needs, but the Earth observation plays a huge role in climate action and the ability to measure and monitor our planet from a climate perspective and environmental perspective. So it's a really exciting place to be in order to drive the Sustainable Development Goals. They have a lot that they can do.
Yeah, I think the industry could do more of sharing how it plays a role in combating climate change. And that's something that we cover it via satellite sometimes. And I mean, at least a couple times a year, we're writing stories toward that end. But I always feel like the industry could do a better job of promoting itself in that way.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I think there is a lot that we're doing, and I think a lot of people are on a journey to do more. And so, yeah, I think it would be wonderful to hear more of those stories across the industry.
Yeah. There was one other thing on climate that I forgot to ask when we were talking about that. You mentioned that part of it is looking at the company's own risks from climate. What would you say that those are for SES, or like what does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, you can look at standard frameworks that are out there, right? So from a climate risk reporting perspective, there's standard frameworks out there. The TCFD is one of them. And it is a framework that helps, as a company, helps you understand what your climate risks could be. Are they long-term? Are they short-term? Are they financial? Are they reputational? And it could be anything from, we see that there is climate legislation coming, and we would be able to identify risks associated with different taxes coming for carbon emissions, or we operate in an area that has a lot of weather events, and therefore we need to make sure that we are, mitigating against those weather events or moving operations, right? So it can be a number of different things, and it's going to be really dependent on where your company operates, how it operates, and what those risks, how you evaluate those risks within your company. But it is something that more and more, especially in the investment community and the government stakeholders, are really asking companies to understand that. And so it's something that has become really important in the reporting world, but also in just overall business operations, making sure you understand those climate risks.
Yeah, that makes sense. What do you hope is the long-term impact of your efforts?
Yeah, I mean, I think at SES, my long-term impact is to really drive purpose into the organization, to make sure that in everything we do, we are operating responsibly, maximizing the positive impact we can have on the world, minimizing the negative impacts that we're having on the world, and drive our whole industry to be more innovative for a sustainable planet. Maybe, the personal vision for me outside of my company, boundaries is really, I got into this because I feel like it's really important that we are challenging our world to understand the purpose of a company, to understand, the things that drive a company to success. And you see a lot of, economics 101 is growth, 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 growth. But I think you're starting to see different people ask growth to what end, right? At what else are we trying to accomplish here besides just financial return? And I think we need to kind of unpack that as a much larger question.
Yeah.
It's way larger than the satellite industry. It's way larger than the space industry, but it feels really important in my personal kind of vision and goal is to make sure that we start questioning the company's role in society and start measuring metrics that are non-financial as far as what value a company can add to our world, and then make sure that we are holding companies accountable to those metrics.
That's a huge question and a super important question. And it's also one that I'm hearing more about, like in the broader corporate world. But how can you get shareholders on board with some of these other success metrics?
Yeah, I think that's it's a much bigger question and probably way higher than my pay grade, right? I think you are starting to see some investors who really pay attention to ESG metrics. I wouldn't say all by any means, but there are ESG funds for a reason, right? Some, especially personal investors, want to put their money with companies that are aligned with their values, right? And so I think there are some ways that you can do that, on a personal level, to make sure that your money is where your mouth is. I think from a large corporate level, it takes some pretty bold leaders and visions to accomplish that. And, I mentioned Unilever as an example of a company that I really admire, and Paul Pullman developed their kind of strategy around sustainable living. The Sustainable Living Plan is what he called it. And he has several books, but one of the first things he did at Unilever was stop doing quarterly business readouts for investors, right?
Wow.
Quarterly business earnings. And he thought it's too short term. I don't want my investors thinking that short term. I want them thinking long term, which is bold. So
That's very bold.
I think it takes some leaders like that who have a vision and who know what companies can achieve to do things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's super interesting. The larger conversation on like what is success and how do we define that and companies' impacts on the planet. It's a super exciting field that you're working in.
It is. I love it. I really love it. And I think thank you for having this conversation. I think, it is a much larger question, but there are things you can do today, which is what we're trying to do at SES in operationalize an ESG strategy, understand what those values are, make some metrics and targets and get going.
Yes. Are there any like things coming up in the next few months that we should know about or that people should look for?
SES, like I said, one of our big priorities is our life cycle assessment. And so we will definitely be, at least sharing our lessons learned on how that process went and what we can share about what we've learned. So that should be coming up, soonish. I think, definitely by the end of the year is our commitment to finish that. And then shortly thereafter, we should have something to share. I'll be speaking at the satellite conference on that topic. So
Okay, awesome.
That's something to look forward to.
Well, Amber, thank you so much. And definitely, keep me posted on SES's evolving look at ESG. I appreciate it.
This was an absolute pleasure. Thank you, Rachel, for having me.